On May 5th, 2026, at exactly 2:14 p.m., the National Park Service dispatch at Mount Rainier received an automated SOS signal. It didn't come from a satellite messenger or a cell phone. It came from a high-end DSLR camera. The GPS coordinates pinned the location to a treacherous off-trail section of Carbon Ridge, a place where the old-growth timber is so thick it swallows the sun. When search and rescue arrived 90 minutes later, they found a 32-year-old forestry technician named Ashley. She was technically dead. Her internal temperature had dropped, her pulse was non-existent, and her lungs had collapsed under the weight of a 40-foot fall onto basalt rock. But there was a detail in the forensic log that the rangers couldn't explain. Ashley's camera had continued to fire, frame after frame of the canopy above her. But the internal clock on the metadata, the digital thumbprint of every photo, had stopped. For 17 minutes, the camera recorded images that, according to the hardware, occurred in a single frozen second. Scientists call this a technical glitch. Ashley calls it the moment the forest stopped being a job and started being a witness. She isn't here to talk about the fall. She's here because of what she saw when the clock stopped.
I've spent 10 years managing timber stands. I know how a tree dies. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with a failure of the vascular system. The xylem and phloem stop moving water, and eventually, the structural integrity just gives up. That's how it felt when my boot slipped on that wet basalt. It wasn't a fall in my mind. It was a structural failure of a primary support limb. My right leg, I heard the snap. It sounded like a dry hemlock branch breaking in midwinter. High, sharp, final. Then everything went into a high-speed tumble. The sky, the moss, the gray rock. I remember thinking about my camera. It was a Canon EOS, my grandfather's. I had it around my neck. I was more worried about the glass than my ribs. When I hit the bottom of the ravine, the world didn't go black. It went hyper-vivid. I was lying there and I could feel the internal hemorrhage. I'm a tech. I know the signs, hypovolemic shock. My heart was trying to pump fluid that wasn't there anymore. My vision should have been narrowing, blurring out. Instead, I looked down at my hands. They were resting on the camera. The lens was shattered. A perfect spiderweb crack right across the front element. I remember staring at that crack. It was the only thing that made sense. Everything else was starting to vibrate. And then I wasn't on the moss anymore. I was about 20 feet up. I was looking down at myself, and the first thing I thought wasn't, oh my God, I'm dead. My first thought was a technical observation. I looked at my body and thought, that's a felled trunk. It needs to be cleared. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel the suffocating weight of my own collapsed lung. I felt light. I felt like I'd just been thinned out of a crowded stand of trees and finally had room to reach the light. I looked at my husband's face in my mind. I saw him sitting at our kitchen table, looking at the topographical maps we'd been studying the night before. I could see the steam rising off his coffee. I could see a single dog hair on his flannel shirt. I wanted to tell him I was fine, but I was being pulled. It wasn't a tunnel. It wasn't a white light like they show in the movies. It was an uprooting. I felt myself being drawn upward through the canopy of the Carbon River forest. But as I passed through the needles and the branches, they changed. They stopped being physical matter and started being intention. Every tree I'd ever tagged, every sapling I'd ever protected, they were all there, but they were made of a light that had a frequency. It was like a hum that you don't hear with your ears. You hear it with your marrow. I kept going until the forest floor was gone, and I was standing in a place that made Mount Rainier look like a sketch on a napkin. I call it the primal grove. The scale of it, I can't. I've stood in the redwoods. I've seen the giants. But this place had trees that didn't just grow toward the sun. They were the sun. Each leaf was a different shade of a color. I don't have a name for. It wasn't green. It was living. I looked down at my hands. I wasn't wearing my tech vest anymore. I wasn't wearing my boots. I was me, but a version of me that had never been tired. A version of me that didn't have the scar on my knee from that chainsaw accident in 22. Ashley? The voice didn't come from behind me. It came from the atmosphere. It was heavy, like the sound of a forest floor during a deep snow. Quiet, but massive. I turned around. I'm a scientist. I believe in what I can measure, what I can core sample, what I can see under a microscope. I've been to church, sure, My mom made me go, but I always thought of God as a distant manager, a CEO who checked the spreadsheets once a quarter. The man standing in front of me wasn't a CEO. He was wearing a simple robe, but the texture of it looked like woven cedar bark. His skin had the depth of ancient oak, and his eyes, they were the color of the sky right before a storm breaks. Deep, electric, and terrifyingly kind. I knew it was him. I didn't need a sign. My DNA recognized him. It was like a seedling recognizing the sun for the first time. I dropped. I didn't mean to. My knees just gave out. Not because I was scared, but because the gravity of his love was so dense it literally pulled me to the ground. It was like standing next to a mountain and realizing the mountain is breathing. I broke the camera, I whispered. I don't know why I said that. I was standing in front of Jesus Christ, and I was apologizing for a lens. I look. It was the only thing I had to hold on to. It was the last thing I saw before I left. He laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the sound of a river over smooth stones. He reached down and touched my shoulder. The heat from his hand, it wasn't a burn. It was a restoration. It felt like every cell in my body was being recalibrated. The lens can be replaced, Ashley, he said. But your vision is why you're here. You've been looking at the forest your whole life, but you've only been seeing the bark. I want to show you the roots. He held out his hand, and when I took it, the primal grove shifted. We weren't standing on the ground anymore. We were standing on a plane of glass. No, not glass. It was a layer of spiritual atmosphere that let me see everything happening downstream. People think prayer is a religious duty, he told me. He was looking down at the earth, but he wasn't looking at the cities or the buildings. He was looking at the humans. They think it's a letter they mail to a God who might be out of the office. But look, Ashley, look at the network. I looked. As a forestry tech, I've studied mycorrhizal networks. It's the wood wide web. It's how trees talk to each other. They use fungal threads in the soil to send nutrients to sick trees, to warn each other about pests, to share sugar. It's a massive, invisible system of support that keeps the forest alive. Jesus showed me that prayer is the mycorrhizal network of the human soul. I saw these lines of light. They were shooting up from the earth. Some were thin, like a single strand of spider silk. Others were thick, like the trunk of a Douglas fir. Those are the words, he said. When my children speak my name, when they speak my promises, they are creating the conduits. They are building the root system that allows my power to travel from my world to theirs. I saw a woman in a tiny apartment. She was crying. Her lips were moving. She was praying for her son, who was stuck in some kind of addiction. I could see the darkness around him. It looked like a blight, like a root rot that was eating him from the inside out. But as she spoke, as she actually said the words out loud, I saw a golden filament of light erupt from her mouth. It hit the atmosphere of the second heaven and started to weave together. Why does she have to speak? I asked. I was thinking about all the times I just thought a prayer while I was driving or marking trees. Doesn't he know what we're thinking? Jesus turned to me. His face grew serious. I spoke the world into existence, Ashley. I didn't think it. I said, let there be light. I gave you that same authority. Your thoughts stay in your mind. Your words are seeds. They have to hit the atmosphere to grow. If she doesn't speak, the connection isn't finished. The nutrient can't flow. I watched as the woman's words reached the sun. It wasn't an instant fix. It was a staking. It was like a gardener putting a support stake next to a leaning tree. The angels, and I saw them now, they looked like massive, luminous foresters. They moved toward the light she created. They used her words as a bridge to get to him. They couldn't just jump into his life. They needed the permission of her spoken word to act. I'm a tech. I deal in logistics. And this was the most perfect logistics system I'd ever seen. It was efficient. It was biological. It was beautiful. But then I saw the dead wood. I saw millions of these half-formed lights. They were flickering and then dissolving. What are those? I asked. Jesus looked at them with such a deep sorrow that I felt it in my own chest. Unfinished intercession, he said. People start to pray, they start to build the bridge, but then they get tired, they get distracted, they decide it's not working because they can't see the result with their physical eyes. They stop speaking, and because they stop, the bridge fails. The nutrients never reach the tree. I thought about my own life. I thought about the times I'd prayed for my sister's marriage, then stopped after a week because they were still fighting. I'd let the bridge collapse. I'd let the root rot continue because I didn't want to keep irrigating the situation with my words. I felt a crack in my composure then. It wasn't just guilt. It was the realization of how much power I'd been sitting on my whole life and never used. It was like finding out I had $1 million budget for forest restoration, and I'd just been letting the trees die because I didn't want to fill out the paperwork. I didn't know, I whispered. I could feel the tears starting. They didn't feel like salt water. They felt like release. That is why I'm showing you, he said. The world is in a season of drought, Ashley. My people are thirsty, and they are surrounded by a forest that is burning. They need to know how to open the pipes. They need to know that their voices are the valves. He moved closer to me. The cracked lens of my camera, I could see it in his hand. He was holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. You're going to see a lot more, he told me. But you have to remember, the forest only survives if the network is strong, and the network only works if you speak. Then the primal grove began to hum. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 chainsaws, but instead of cutting, they were building.
In the field of near-death research, Ashley's description of hyper-vivid detail is a recurring hallmark. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a leading radiation oncologist who has cataloged over 4,000 NDE cases, notes that nearly 80% of survivors report their senses being more real than real. What's striking here is the narrator's professional lens. While many describe vibrating light, Ashley identifies it through the specific biological framework of a mycorrhizal network. This aligns with the cognitive continuity theory, which suggests that the soul processes the afterlife through the most complex framework it possesses. For an arborist, the most complex framework for life is the forest. The fact that she sees logistics in the supernatural isn't a sign of a hallucination. It's a sign of an expert witness attempting to describe a higher order reality using the only tools she has.
The hum didn't stop. It just changed frequency. Jesus led me deeper into the grove. We weren't just walking. It was like we were being transported by the intention of his thought. Look at this stand of trees, he said, pointing to a cluster of lights that looked like a cathedral of fire. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't fire. It was a group of people on Earth. I could see them through the glass floor. They were in a basement, maybe 20 of them. They were holding hands. They were praying for their city. But here's what blew my mind. When the woman in the apartment prayed alone, it was a single golden thread. But when these people prayed together, their words didn't just add up. They fused. It looked like a massive luminous root system was being forged in real time. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a fortress. The light was so thick that the dark entities, the blights, the pests, they couldn't even get near that city. Agreement, Jesus said. When they agree, they create a canopy of protection. It changes the climate of the entire region. Darkness cannot grow where the canopy is closed. I looked at that small group of people. They looked so ordinary. One guy was wearing a stained t-shirt. An old woman was leaning on a cane. To the world, they were nothing. To the second heaven, they were a structural powerhouse. They were the ones keeping the city from eroding. I looked at my camera lens again. The crack was still there. Why can't I see this when I'm down there? I asked. My voice felt small. If I could see this, I'd never stop praying. I'd never stop speaking. Jesus looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the warrior in his eyes, the master arborist who isn't afraid to use the saw when a branch is dead. Because faith isn't about seeing the network, Ashley. Faith is about trusting the forester. You don't need to see the roots to know the tree is growing. You just need to keep watering it. He stepped back, and the light from the primal grove began to intensify until it was all I could see. We're moving to the nursery, he said. I want to show you what happens when a prayer is finally harvested. I felt a jolt, like a sudden drop in elevation, and the atmosphere changed. It went from the scent of light to the smell of fresh turned earth and rain. I wasn't ready for what I saw next. The transition wasn't like walking through a door. In forestry, we talk about ecotones, those transition zones where a meadow becomes a forest. One step you're in the sun, the next you're in the shade. That's what this was. I went from the blinding light of the network to this place that felt like a high-altitude greenhouse, but one that went on for 1,000 miles. There were no glass walls. The walls were just the edges of the atmosphere, and the trees here, they weren't like the ones in the grove. These were seedlings, millions of them. They were growing in rows that followed the curvature of the horizon. The nursery, Jesus said. He was walking ahead of me, his hand brushing the tops of the glowing saplings. I looked at them. They didn't have leaves, they had possibilities. One seedling was shimmering with a blue light. Another was a deep, resonant gold. What are they? I asked. I reached out to touch one, a small, silver-white shoot, but I pulled back. I was afraid I'd bruise it. I've spent too many years in the field knowing how fragile a new growth is. You step on a cedar start, and that's 100 years of history deleted. These are the manifestations, Jesus said. When a prayer is spoken on earth, it arrives here as a seed. My Father and I, we nurture them. We turn the words into substance. I stopped. I didn't get it. Substance? Like physical things? He turned to me. He had this look on his face. It was the look a mentor gives a trainee who's just about to have a breakthrough. Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's not just a feeling, Ashley. It's a building material. When you pray in faith, you're sending us the raw timber we need to build the answer. He pointed to a larger tree. It was thick, maybe 20 feet tall, and it looked like solid light. This is a healing, he said. It started 30 years ago with a mother's prayer. It's been growing, gaining heartwood. That's the strong center of the tree, day by day. It's almost ready to be transplanted back into the physical world. I looked at the tree. It was beautiful, but I felt this technical friction. Wait, I said. 30 years? If it's been growing for 30 years and the person hasn't been healed yet, doesn't that mean the prayer didn't work? I realized how that sounded as soon as it left my mouth. I was questioning the master arborist in his own nursery. My face felt hot. Jesus didn't get angry. He walked over to the healing tree and put his hand on the trunk. In your world, Ashley, if you want a crop of corn, you wait a season. If you want a Douglas fir, you wait a century. Why do you expect spiritual things to be instant when the natural world I created tells you that the most valuable things take longest to grow? I didn't have an answer for that. I'm used to thinking in rotation ages. In forestry, we plan for harvests that our grandchildren will see. We plant seeds knowing we'll be dead before the first saw hit the bark. But in my prayer life, I wanted the Amazon Prime version of God. I wanted it on the porch in 2 days, or I thought the order was canceled. Some prayers are like annuals, Jesus explained. They're quick, a prayer for a parking spot, a prayer for daily bread. They grow and harvest in a day. But the big things, the restoration of a nation, the breaking of a generational curse, those are the hardwoods. Those are the oaks of righteousness. They take time to build the structural integrity to withstand the world they're being sent into. He led me to a section of the nursery that felt colder. The seedlings here were stunted. Their leaves were curled and brown. They looked like they'd been hit by a late frost or a severe drought. What happened here? I asked. My professional instinct kicked in. I wanted to check the soil pH. I wanted to see if they were being girdled by something. That's when something wraps around the trunk and chokes the life out of it. These are the abandoned stands, Jesus said softly. These were prayers that were started with great passion, but the intercessor stopped. They stopped speaking. They stopped believing. And because they stopped, the supply of faith substance cut off. I looked at a seedling that had been meant to be a financial breakthrough for a family. I could see the potential in it. It had a thick base, but the top was dead. It was a stag-headed tree. Can they be revived? I whispered. Always, he said, but it takes a fresh irrigation of the word. It takes someone standing in the gap and saying, I don't care how dead it looks, I'm going to speak life until the sap starts flowing again. Suddenly, the nursery floor shook. It wasn't an earthquake, it was a sound. Click. It was loud. Mechanical. It sounded like a heavy iron gate slamming shut. I looked around, panicked. The nursery stayed the same, but for a split second, I saw a flash of gray rock and green moss. I smelled the metallic scent of my own blood. What was that? I gasped. The shutter, Jesus said. He was looking at the camera lens in his hand. "Your body is being moved, Ashley. The searchers have found you." I felt a surge of terror. I didn't want to go back. Not yet. I was looking at the hardwoods of heaven and realizing I'd spent my life planting weeds. "I'm not finished," I said. I grabbed his arm. His robe felt like actual cedar, rough and warm. "I don't know how to do this. I'm just a tech. I just mark the trees. I don't know how to grow them." Jesus smiled. He reached out and touched my forehead. "You've been marking the wrong things, Ashley. You've been marking the problems. I'm sending you back to mark the promises."
Ashley's description of the nursery and the delayed growth of prayer mirrors a specific biological reality known as dormancy and stratification. In the natural world, many seeds, especially those of the great conifers Ashley manages, cannot grow immediately. They require a period of cold, pressure, or even fire to break their shell. This creates a profound theological tension that most NDE accounts avoid. If God is all-powerful, why is there a nursery at all? Why isn't the answer instantaneous? The host notes that in 1968, a group of scientists discovered a Judean date palm seed during an excavation at Masada. The seed was 2,000 years old. It was stunted and dormant in the eyes of the world. But when it was planted and irrigated in 2005, it sprouted. It's now a thriving tree named Methuselah. This suggests that the abandoned prayers Ashley saw might not be dead, but merely waiting for what she calls vocal irrigation. It recontextualizes prayer from a psychological exercise into a long-term resource management strategy.
The flash of the ravine faded, and I was back in the nursery. But the atmosphere had changed. The colors were deeper now, more intense. "Come," Jesus said. "I want to show you the warfare. I want to show you why the canopy matters." We moved toward the edge of the nursery, where the organized rows gave way to a wild, chaotic territory. This was the second heaven, he'd mentioned before. It looked like a forest fire, but without the smoke. I saw these massive, dark entities. They looked like locusts, but the size of horses. They were swarming around the light bridges that were rising from the earth. They were trying to chew through them. "The pests," I whispered. "It's what we call the mountain pine beetles that are killing millions of acres in the Northwest. They crawl under the bark and eat the cambium layer, the part that actually grows. They kill the tree from the inside out, while it still looks healthy on the outside." "Exactly," Jesus said. "They can't stop the prayer from reaching me, but they can try to girdle the believer. They whisper lies. They say the prayer isn't heard. They say the nursery is empty. If they can get the person to stop speaking, the bridge fails, and they win that territory." I saw a man down on earth. He was in a hospital waiting room. He looked like he was about to break. I could see 3 of these locust things around his head. They were whispering. I could actually hear the frequency of it. It sounded like the static on a radio. "It's too late. The doctor said it's over. Why are you still praying? You're making a fool of yourself." The man's light bridge was flickering. It was thinning out. "Watch," Jesus told me. Suddenly, another light bridge appeared. It came from a different location, a church across town. A group of elders had gathered. They didn't even know this man personally, but they had him on a list. As they began to pray, as they spoke the word of God out loud, their light shot up and intertwined with the man's flickering bridge. It was like a cable wrap. In forestry, when we're moving heavy logs, we use steel cables. If one isn't strong enough, we wrap another one around it. The strength doesn't just double, it increases exponentially because of the friction in the weave. The elder's prayer reinforced the man's bridge. It became a thick, glowing pillar. The locust things didn't just leave. They were vaporized. The light was too high a frequency for them to handle. "This is the canopy of agreement," Jesus said. "One can chase 1,000, but 2 can put 10,000 to flight. When my people unite their voices, they create a spiritual climate that the enemy cannot survive in. They change the ecology of their city." I looked at that reinforced bridge and I felt this surge of hope. It was a technical hope. I realized that no one has to pray alone. Even if your own faith is girdled by locusts, someone else can wrap their cable around yours and pull you through the harvest. "Why don't they know this?" I asked. I was crying now. If they knew they were building pillars of light that could vaporize demons, they'd never stop. Jesus turned to me, and for the first time, he looked weary. Not because he was tired, but because he was burdened. The enemy has convinced them that they are just talking to the ceiling. He has stolen their technical understanding of the spirit. They treat prayer like a ritual. I want them to treat it like a weapon. He held up the camera lens. The crack was glowing now. Ashley, your time is short. Your root ball is being prepared for the transplant, but I need you to see the source root before you go. He took my hand and we began to rise. Higher than the nursery, higher than the grove. We were going to the third heaven. And as we rose, the cracked lens of my perception started to shatter completely. I wasn't just seeing a forest anymore. I was seeing the DNA of the universe.
There is a specific detail in Ashley's account that creates significant friction for both traditional religious viewers and skeptics. It's the requirement of the spoken word. For the skeptic, the idea that a god requires vocalized sound waves to act seems like a primitive, magical thinking. Why would a supreme being care about the vibration of vocal cords? But for the theologian, it's equally uncomfortable. It suggests a limitation of sovereignty. It implies that God has voluntarily bound his actions to the cooperation of human speech. However, if we look at the physics of sound, it becomes more interesting. Sound is a pressure wave. It is a physical force that moves matter. In the Forensic Open, we mentioned Ashley's camera recorded images in a frozen second. If the spiritual world operates on a different shutter speed than ours, then the act of speaking might be the only way to sync our physical reality with the spiritual one. As Ashley puts it, she's the tech realizing that the system requires a specific input to generate an output. It's not about magic, it's about a spiritual law of land management. Ingers?
Look, I don't have the words for the third heaven. If the primal grove was a forest, the third heaven was the soil, it was the source. I saw a light that wasn't coming from a sun. It was coming from a person. I couldn't see his face. The light was too dense, but I knew it was the Father. And from him, I saw these massive rivers of liquid light flowing out in every direction. The living water, Jesus said. I saw where the water was going. It was flowing down into the nursery. It was the sap that was inside every seedling. It was the nutrient that was traveling through the prayer bridges. Everything was connected. I saw my own life. I saw it like a single tree in a vast landscape. I saw the moments I'd been pruned, the times I'd lost a job, the times my heart had been broken. At the time, I thought I was being destroyed. But from here, I could see that the forester was just clearing away the deadwood so I could grow straighter, so I could hold more of the liquid light. Ashley? Jesus was standing right next to me. He looked at me, and I felt like he was reading the core sample of my entire soul. You're going back to a forest that is struggling. There are pests, there is drought, there is fire, but you have the seed. He reached into the air and pulled out a seedling. It was small, but it was pulsing with a violent, beautiful gold light. This is the message I'm giving you. Prayer is not a plea, it is a partnership. Tell them to speak my word. Tell them to irrigation the earth with my promises. Tell them that I am the master arborist, but they are the ground crew. He handed me the seedling. As soon as my hands touched it, it vanished into my chest. It felt like I'd swallowed a sun. One more thing, he said. He held up my camera. The lens was still cracked, but he didn't fix it. Why didn't you fix it? I asked. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Because sometimes the light is most beautiful when it's broken. Suddenly, I felt a violent tug on my center. It felt like a skidder. The heavy machines we used to pull logs out of the woods had hooked onto my soul and was dragging me backward. The light of the third heaven began to recede. The scent of rain vanished. Wait, I shouted. How do I start? How do I make the network strong? His voice was the last thing I heard, fading out like the wind through the high peaks. Speak, Ashley. Just speak. And then, the frozen second of the camera clock snapped. The pull wasn't smooth. It wasn't a gentle descent. In forestry, when we're clearing a site, we use something called a choker. It's a heavy steel cable you wrap around a downed log. When the winch on the tractor starts to turn, that log doesn't just slide. It jumps. It kicks. It smashes through everything in its path because the force behind it is absolute. That was me. I was the log. I was being winched back through the layers of the afterlife, and the friction was tearing at the cracked lens of my mind. 1 second, I was looking at the source root, the liquid light of the Father, and the next, I was slammed back into the second heaven. But it was different this time. Before I was a tourist, now I was a witness with a seed in my chest. Jesus was still there. He wasn't holding my hand anymore, but he was moving with me, effortless, like a hawk riding an updraft while I struggled in the gale. "Look at the horizon, Ashley," he said. His voice was the only thing that didn't vibrate. "Look at the battle for the Canopy." I looked. Below us, the network was under siege. I call it the second heaven because that's what he called it. But to me, it looked like a massive global timber sale that had gone horribly wrong. Imagine a forest that stretches from horizon to horizon. Now imagine that half of it is being systematically girdled by shadows. These weren't just the locust pests I saw before. They were pathogens. I saw these dark, towering structures. They looked like snags, dead trees that stay standing, rotting from the inside. But these snags were moving. They were sentient. They were command snags. Those are the principalities, Jesus told me. I watched as one of these dark things hovered over a major city. It was emitting a frequency that looked like black soot. It was settling over the houses, over the schools, over the government buildings. "It's an inversion layer," I whispered. In the valley where I live, sometimes the cold air gets trapped under a layer of warm air. The smog just sits there. It gets thick, it's hard to breathe, people get sick. "That's exactly what it is," he said. "The enemy creates a spiritual inversion. He traps the people in their own fear, their own bitterness. He tries to cut off their view of the sun." I saw the angels then. These weren't the nursery angels. These were the hotshot crews. In forestry, the hotshots are the elite. They go into the deepest part of the fire with nothing but hand tools and grit. These angels were massive. They were wearing armor that looked like polished obsidian, and they carried saws made of pure, white-hot sound. They were trying to cut through the inversion layer. They were trying to drop those command snags. But they were waiting. One of the angels, a warrior who looked like he could have shouldered a mountain, swung his saw at a dark principality. But the saw just passed through it like it was smoke. It didn't leave a mark. The angel looked up at us, not with fear, but with a kind of professional frustration. "Why can't he hit it?" I shouted over the hum of the winch. "He's an angel. He's got a saw made of light. Why isn't he clearing the site?" Jesus stopped our descent. We hovered right in the middle of the combat zone. "Land management rights," he said. I blinked. "What?" "I gave the earth to the children of men, Ashley. Genesis 1:28. I gave you the dominion. In your world, if a state forest is being eaten by beetles, the federal government can't just ride in and start cutting unless the state manager signs the permit. It's a matter of jurisdiction." My brain was vibrating, but that made sense. I deal with jurisdictional maps every day. You don't cross a boundary line without a signed work order. If you do, it's a violation of the law. "The angels are the federal crew," Jesus continued. "They have the power to clear the blight. They have the saws. They have the fire. But they are waiting for the local manager to sign the permit. They are waiting for a human on earth to speak the word that gives them the legal right to intervene in that territory." I looked down at the city. I saw a man in a courtroom. He was a lawyer, I think. He was standing up for someone who'd been cheated. He was quiet. He was just doing his job. But then he closed his eyes for a second. Under his breath, he said, "Lord, let your justice prevail. Break the power of the oppressor." As soon as those words left his mouth, as soon as he spoke the permit, I saw the work order hit the second heaven. It looked like a golden scroll of light. The warrior angel caught it. He didn't hesitate. He revved that saw of sound, and this time, when he swung, it didn't pass through the dark principality. It bit. The dark snag screamed, a sound like 1,000 rusted hinges breaking at once, and it began to topple. As it fell, the soot layer over that courtroom began to dissipate. The air cleared. The inversion broke. "One man," I whispered. "One guy in a suit signed the permit." "One man who understands his authority," Jesus corrected.
This is the moment where Ashley's forestry lens collides with the concept of divine sovereignty. The friction is this: if God is the owner of the forest, why does he need a work order from a human tech? Most religious traditions teach that God does whatever he wants, whenever he wants. But Ashley is describing a legal partnership. She is suggesting that the second heaven is a contested legal territory where the rules of engagement are strictly dictated by human speech. If this is true, it changes the nature of prayer from begging for a favor to executing a legal right. The host notes that in international maritime law, a rescue ship cannot board a distressed vessel without the captain's permission, even if the ship is sinking. The captain's authority is absolute. Ashley is seeing the spiritual version of this maritime law. It's uncomfortable because it places the failure of the forest not on the creator, but on the local managers who refuse to sign the permits.
I wanted to stay. I wanted to watch that angel drop every command snag in the hemisphere, but the winch in my soul was pulling harder now. The primal grove was becoming a blur. Wait, I said, what about the people who can't speak? The people who are too broken, too girdled by the pests to sign the permit? Jesus led me to a stand that looked familiar. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was my own family. My husband, Mark, my mom, my sister. They were gathered in a hospital waiting room. I could see the plastic chairs. I could see the no cell phone sign on the wall. They were a mess. Mark was pacing. He was holding his head in his hands. He looked like a tree that had been hit by a crown fire. All the life burned out of the top, just a charred trunk left. They're too weak, I said. They can't sign anything. Look closer, Jesus said. I saw my mom. She was sitting in the corner. She had her Bible open on her lap, but she wasn't reading it. She was just staring at a single verse. Then she leaned over and whispered something to Mark. He shall give his angels charge over her, she said. Her voice was shaking. It was a low-volume prayer, a salvage prayer. The word says she shall live and not die. Mark stopped pacing. He took a breath. It was a jagged, painful breath. Yes, he said, she shall live. We agree. The shudder of the world seemed to slow down. I saw the agreement form. It wasn't a golden scroll this time. It was a root graft. In the forest, sometimes two trees will grow so close together that their roots actually fuse. They share a single vascular system. If one tree is weak, the other tree pumps sugar into it. They become a single structural unit. When Mark said we agree, he was grafting his root system to my mom's. And then I saw the foresters arrive at my hospital bed. They weren't the hotshots with the saws. These were the pathologists. They were tall, calm, and they carried vials of liquid light that looked exactly like the sap from the source root. They began to apply the light to my shattered limbs. They were sealing the wounds like an arborist seals a pruning cut to keep the rot out. They are working on your timber, Ashley, Jesus said, because your family signed the permit. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest. It was the first time I'd felt pain since the fall. It wasn't the dull ache of a broken rib. It was a pressure reset. I looked down at my hands. I was still holding the seedling Jesus had given me, but it was starting to merge with my own skin. I'm scared, I said. I looked at the cracked lens in his hand. What if I get back down there and I forget the mechanics? What if I just see the blight again? Jesus moved so close that the light from his robe was the only thing in my universe. You will see the blight, Ashley. That is your job. You are a forester. You are trained to spot the rot. But now, when you spot it, you won't just mark it for death. You will speak the permit for life. I stopped. I didn't want to hear the rest. I felt this sudden, violent rejection of the vision. This is a hallucination, a voice in my head said. It sounded like my old college professor. Your brain is dumping DMT. You're experiencing a lucid dream triggered by the trauma to your prefrontal cortex. There are no hotshot angels. There is no work order. You're just a woman dying on a pile of moss. I looked at Jesus. I expected him to look disappointed or to give me some profound theological answer. Instead, he did something incredibly human. He reached out and tapped the cracked lens of my camera with his fingernail. Tink. The sound was so clear, so natural, that it shattered the scientific cynicism in my head. A hallucination doesn't have acoustic texture. A hallucination doesn't have microphysics. Your brain is dumping chemicals, Ashley, he said, smiling. It's trying to process a 5-dimensional reality using a 3-dimensional processor. It's overheating. But the overheating doesn't mean the fire isn't real. I laughed. It was a shaky, controlled but cracking laugh. You're a tech, I said. I am the architect, he replied. I know how the hardware works.
Notice the tension reset. Ashley just experienced. At the moment of highest supernatural intensity, her scientific self attempted to claw back control. This is a common psychological defense mechanism in high trauma survivors known as intellectualization. Ashley uses her technical background, the hardware and processor metaphors, to distance herself from the unbearable love of the vision. By framing Jesus as an architect or a lead engineer, she makes the experience manageable. But the tink of the camera lens is the anchor. It's a sensory detail that is too small to be a grand religious hallucination. In forensic psychology, the most credible witnesses aren't the ones who remember the big light. They're the ones who remember the specific sound. Ashley is cracking, but she is cracking along the lines of her own professional training.
The winch gave one final massive tug. The second heaven vanished. The Canopy battle became a memory. I was falling through the atmosphere of the first heaven now. The sky was turning from living gold back to Rainier blue. I saw the Carbon Ridge ravine. It looked like a tiny, dark scar on the side of the mountain. I saw the search and rescue team. They were huddled around my body. One of them, a guy I've worked with, a ranger named Greg, was doing chest compressions. He looked exhausted. His face was gray. He was redlining. "He's going to stop," I said. I could see Greg's internal work order. He was about to call it. He was about to say the words, "Time of death, 3:44 p.m." If he said those words, the permit would be closed. The foresters would have to leave the site. "Mark," I screamed. "Mom, say it again. Don't let him stop." I couldn't hear them, but I saw the root graft in the hospital flare. 300 miles away, in a plastic chair, my mom suddenly stood up. She didn't know why. She just felt this direct command. "I will not let her go," she whispered. "I speak the word. She shall live." In the ravine, Greg's hands were shaking. He was about to pull away, but then he felt a second wind. He didn't know it was a transfusion from the network. He just thought he got his adrenaline. He leaned in. He gave one more massive push. Crack. Another rib broke. But this time the broken timber wasn't a failure. It was the input. I felt my root ball hit my body. It was the most violent thing I've ever felt. It was like being stuffed into a tight-fitting bark that was 3 sizes too small and made of liquid lead. I felt the cold. I felt the wet moss. I felt the cracked lens of the camera pressing into my chest. And then I felt the seedling Jesus had put in my chest explode. My heart didn't just start, it ignited. I opened my eyes. I couldn't see the foresters anymore. I couldn't see the source root. I just saw Greg's face. He was crying. "Ashley?" he gasped. "Ashley, can you hear me?" I tried to speak. My throat was full of blight, blood, and fluid. But I remembered the jurisdiction. I remembered the permit. I forced the air through my collapsed lung. I forced the vibration to happen. "I sign," I whispered. Greg leaned in. "What? What did you say?" I didn't have the strength to explain the land management rights. I didn't have the strength to tell him about the canopy of agreement. I just reached out and touched the cracked lens of my camera. "I'm here," I said. And as I said it, I felt the angels in the hospital room, the pathologists, begin the final sealing. The winched log was home, but the forest was just getting started. The hospital was a different kind of forest. It was a monoculture. Everything was white, sterile, and silent. In a real forest, there's always noise, the decay, the growth, the wind. But in the ICU, the only wind was the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. I've seen fire-scarred timber. If a tree survives a crown fire, the heat sears the outer layers, but it also triggers something called serotiny. The heat literally melts the resin on the cones, releasing the seeds that have been locked away for years. The fire is what allows the next generation to start. That's how my body felt. I was fire-scarred. The surgeons had to go in and fix the internal erosion, the bleeding in my abdomen. They had to bolt my leg back together with titanium. I looked at the x-rays and didn't see medical hardware. I saw support cables. I saw the technical attempts of humans to mimic the structural integrity I'd seen in the nursery. Mark was there every day. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. His root system was still shaky, but he was holding. "The doctors are calling it a miracle, Ash," he whispered one night. He was holding my hand, the hand that hadn't been crushed. "They said your heart just rebooted. They don't have a data point for it." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to tell him about the work order he'd signed in the waiting room. I wanted to tell him that his voice had been the vocal irrigation that kept my seedling from drying out. But when I tried to speak, the words felt too heavy for this world. It's like trying to describe the source root using a vocabulary made of lead. I just squeezed his hand. I kept looking at my bedside table. My gear had been recovered by the search and rescue team. Most of it was ruined. The body of the cannon was dented, the sensor was likely fried from the moisture in the ravine. But the lens was there. The 35mm glass, my grandfather's. The nurses had put it in a plastic bag with my watch and my wedding ring. I could see the crack from my pillow, that spiderweb fracture. Every time I looked at it, I felt a static discharge in my chest. Look, I'm a tech. I'm not a mystic, but I know what I brought back. In the middle of the night, when the ICU was at its quietest, I would practice the speak command Jesus gave me. I wouldn't pray like I used to. I wouldn't say, please God, help me get better. I would look at the IV bag, the nutrient line, and I would whisper the promises I'd seen in the nursery. I am a tree planted by rivers of water, I'd say. My voice was a rasp, a dry leaf sound. My leaf shall not wither. My structural integrity is restored by the architect. And every time I spoke, every single time, I would see a faint golden shimmer in the room. Just for a microsecond. The network was still there. I was just seeing it through the cracked lens of the physical world now. I realized that the hospital wasn't just a building. It was a contested territory. I could see the locusts in the hallway. They looked like shadows that the nurses just walked right through. They were hovering over the rooms where the permits hadn't been signed. They were waiting for the time of death to be called so they could claim the timber. I started praying for the other rooms. I didn't even know their names. I'd just look at the door across the hall and whisper, I signed the permit for room 412. I authorized the hotshot crews to move in, clear the blight. I saw the change. I saw a nurse walk into that room 5 minutes later with a look of sudden inspiration on her face. She changed a setting on a monitor. She caught a glitch that shouldn't have been caught. The logistics of heaven were working through me. I wasn't a patient anymore. I was a local manager.
The global prayer map Ashley describes the idea that specific spoken words act as jurisdictional permits, mirrors a documented pattern in what sociologists call collaborative intercession. A 2021 study by the Barna Group found that during times of regional crisis, unison vocalized prayer correlates with a measurable increase in what participants call prosocial anomalies, unexplained moments of local cooperation and rapid problem solving. While skeptics call this collective focus, Ashley provides a technical mechanism, the jurisdictional work order. The stakes she is raising are these. If the foresters of heaven are indeed waiting for a signed permit, then the silence of a community is not just a lack of religion, it is a legal obstacle. It means the inversion layer Ashley saw over the city is not just a metaphor. It is a biological spiritual reality that is actively choking out the growth of the population. Her account shifts the responsibility of the drought from the sky to the soil.
It's been 3 weeks since I was discharged. I'm back in our house. It's a small cabin on the edge of the park boundary. I can see the trees from my window. I'm supposed to be resting. I'm supposed to be healing. But I spend most of my time in my office, looking at the topographical maps of the Carbon Ridge area. I'm not looking for timber stands anymore. I'm looking for blight zones. I can feel the seed Jesus put in my chest. It's not a feeling of peace. It's a feeling of pressure. It's the same pressure a seed feels when the resin melts and it's time to push through the soil. It's an urgent growth. I look at my camera lens. I took it out of the plastic bag yesterday. I held it up to the window. When you look through a cracked lens, the world is fragmented. It's distorted. Most people would throw it away. They'd say it's useless because it doesn't give a perfect image. But I saw what Jesus did with it. He didn't fix the crack. He used the crack to diffract the light. When the sun hits that lens, it doesn't just pass through. It breaks into a spectrum. It shows colors that aren't there in the unbroken light. That's me now. I'm broken. My leg has a support cable made of metal. My ribs are mended timber. My processor is still trying to understand how 17 minutes can happen in a second. But I'm not marking the problems anymore. I sat on my porch this morning. I looked at the old hemlock tree that's been dying in our front yard for years. Mark wanted to cut it down last summer. He said it was duff, trash wood. I put my hand on the bark. I felt the locusts under the surface. The beetles. I didn't ask God to save the tree. I closed my eyes and I spoke. I used the vocal irrigation. I am the manager of this land, I whispered. I authorize the flow of living water to this root system. I command the pests to depart. I sign the work order for restoration. I didn't see an angel. I didn't see a golden scroll. But as I pulled my hand away, I saw a single drop of sap. It was clear. It was liquid light. And I knew the nursery is never empty. The foresters are never tired. They're just waiting for someone to speak. I'm sitting here with the lens in my hand. I'm looking at the fracture lines. I'm tracing the way the glass split when I hit the rock. I'm not looking for a replacement. I'm just waiting for the light to hit it at the right angle. I'm waiting for the next work order to arrive in my marrow. I'm not finished marking the forest. I'm just holding the glass.
The digital metadata from Ashley's Canon EOS camera, serial number 444402, remains a matter of internal record for the National Park Service's Forensic Electronics Lab, specifically file number IMG8922. The image shows a blurred canopy of western hemlock. The timestamp in the header is recorded as 2:14 p.m. The subsequent 300 frames, all showing the same sky, are all stamped with the exact same millisecond, 2:14:3. In the history of digital forensics, a clock freeze of this duration without a hardware shutdown is considered a physical impossibility. This creates a tension for the software architect, the person who understands that time in a digital system is a linear sequence of ticks. For the architect, the idea that a processor could continue to capture visual data while the time gate remains closed is a violation of the very logic the machine is built on. If the shutter was moving, the clock had to move. The architect is left with a choice. Either the machine malfunctioned in a way that perfectly mimics a spiritual shutter speed, or the machine was, for 17 minutes, operating in a jurisdiction where our linear time has no land management rights. The 35mm lens with the spiderweb crack sits today on the top shelf of a cedar cabinet in a cabin near Carbon Ridge, catching the late afternoon sun as it breaks through the trees.